Welcome to the TLI workshop on how to effectively respond to criticism. My name is Abhijit Joshi. I'm your host for tonight. Before I introduce the speaker, I want to thank the tech experts, Nishant Chandrasekhar, Ashish Kuttagadu, Cedric De Brito, PR manager, Ines Sheikh, event manager, Maithili Prabhu. Our today's speaker is Arnie Buss. The presenter for this educational session on responding to criticism is a long-time Toastmaster. Apart from his day job, teaching computer simulation, he offers seminars and workshops on effective communication and relationship building. He has tried to find a balance between the logical and analytical part of his brain with the intuitive and emotional part, since it is this balance that helps achieve the kind and loving relationship that we all desire. Please welcome Distinguished Toastmaster, Arnie Buss.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Abhijit. And thank you so much for inviting me to this presentation. This is my first Zoom one. So thank you to District 101 and their fantastic tech support team who have really helped facilitate this. So any glitches are going to be my responsibility. Before we start, just a few logistic procedures. The bathroom is down the hall on the left. Oh, that's mine. So presumably you know where yours are. Also, before we get started, there is something about, I'm going to share my screen, and here is what I learned. When I'm sharing the screen, if you follow these directions, then you can balance the presentation screen and seeing the various participants or myself. So as I'm sharing the screen, if you click the view options, and then if you select the side-by-side mode, and then you will see a drag bar. If you take that drag bar and then drag it to the center a little more or wherever you like to see it, then you will be able to have kind of more of a balanced view of the presentation and of myself. Now there's a handout that's been placed in the chat. It's a fillable PDF. So as I'm getting started, if you could download that and open it up in Adobe, I assume everybody has at least an Acrobat reader. That's the handout that we will be using. It's not absolutely required, but it will be very helpful as we go along. When I give this presentation in person-to-person mode, these are usually paper handouts, so we're trying to do the best we can with all this. Also, throughout the presentation, if you have a question, feel free to unmute yourself if you can. If you can't, then raise your hand and one of the tech support people will be able to unmute you and jump in, because this is good, hope to be as interactive as possible. Again, through this Zoom land, interaction is a little bit challenging, but again, I encourage you to If something comes up that you have a question, if something comes up that you have an objection to, that's fine too. So whatever I present today, don't take my word for it. Just try it out and test it for yourself. So here we go. If I can, give me a second here. I need to end this one and start this one. Okay, responding to verbal criticism. Arnie Buss. I go by Arnie. My friends called me Arnie, but you can call me Dr. Buss. Just in terms of truth in advertising, as it were, I do have a PhD. I do have an undergraduate degree in psychology. However, my PhD is in operations research, and my day job is, as mentioned, teaching computer programming and computer simulation. So what I'm presenting here is what I don't do in my day job, but I do when I'm not in my day job. So today we're going to talk about how to respond to verbal criticism. Now, if you, maybe you never hear any verbal criticism. I know that in Toastmasters, when we give a speech evaluation, we are never to criticize. The most we do is we offer suggestions for improvement. And while that may sound like a semantic difference, it's a significant one. In other words, instead of saying, that was terrible, or, your speech really sucked, we say, well, it would have been more effective if maybe you had used less profane language, something like that. However, outside of Toastmasters, you may have received some criticism, probably not from another Toastmaster, because if a Toastmaster had something constructive to give, he would have given it using the sandwich method. However, if you're in a relationship or a friendship, they may not have heard of the sandwich method. So when we're not giving speeches or giving evaluations, maybe we have interactions that look something like this. And, maybe you can relate to one or perhaps both of these individuals, when we're speaking, how do we know that the message is getting through? And when we're listening, are we hearing the message, or we're just hearing blah, 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 blah? All too often, when we're speaking, the other person isn't really paying attention and hearing what we're saying. And many times when we're on the receiving end, all we hear is just sort of the blah, 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 blah. And then all of a sudden we get, you're not listening to me. You never listen to me. Now, when you hear verbal criticism, whether it could be in an angry tone, but it could be in a quiet tone, especially if it's from somebody that you care about, somebody whose relationship is important, it can come across like they're shouting through a bullhorn. And how do we respond? How do we react to that? Well, one is, again, the blah, blah, blah. We just kind of put our fingers in our ear and say, okay, I can't hear you. Or maybe we just kind of zone out and get, 1,000-yard stare. So this other person is kind of yelling at us and we're just going, Or, and again, especially with some teenagers, not all, but some teenagers and maybe young people, or even some old people like myself will just kind of go, okay, I'll just kind of go on my phone and, update my Instagram and, check my texts and everything like that. And meanwhile, somebody is kind of screaming at them, or we may be, actually just sort of facing them and trying to interact with them, but it comes across as just kind of blowing ourselves back like that. So if you can relate to any of the recipients of this, or even the people with the bullhorn, again, what this event is about the person who's listening to this. Now, I have another workshop that I give that's directed at the people with the bullhorn, which is when something is going wrong and you want to address an issue, then there are effective ways of doing that. That's an entirely different talk. Here we're talking about what happens if you get the criticism right in your face. And here's what happens, again, in a relationship that's important to us. All of a sudden, somebody gets angry and criticizes the other person. If it's a normal relationship, that's perfectly normal. Conflict in a relationship, here's a newsflash, is normal. It happens in every relationship. If you're in a relationship and there is no conflict, then somebody isn't showing up. Maybe neither one of you are showing up. But when something is off about the other person, even if you try to hold it in, if that relationship endures for any period of time, it's like a pebble in your shoe on a 20-mile walk. Sooner or later, it's just going to come out in criticism. And then this is the result. You see, they're facing away from each other. They're not connected. That's not what we want. Okay, now I want you to take a few minutes. And if you've never heard any criticism, then the next few minutes you can check your Insta for the next few minutes. But with that PDF that you grabbed from the chat, you'll see that in the first section, there's a place to just kind of write down. I say write down or type in, or again, in person. This is usually done with pen and paper. But think of a criticism that you heard recently. Think of something that somebody said to you that just didn't feel right. It felt like a personal attack. It could be from maybe a spouse or a significant other or a friend, a family member. If you have a family, chances are you've heard some criticism. Maybe a coworker, that person who is sometimes labeled as a difficult person, or maybe just difficult to you. They've come at you with some kind of criticism, or a neighbor, or anybody else. Just take a few minutes and write down a criticism that you have heard lately. Okay, so I hope you've had an opportunity to, and I hope it hasn't been too painful to remember one of these. Remember that whenever something painful happens, that really the best way is through it, not around it. Okay, so here are some criticisms that actually I have actually heard myself. And again, if you haven't heard any, then you maybe just use your imagination. You just won't listen. You did this to me. It's your fault. You are so selfish. You're so unfair. You never think of me. You never pay attention to me. And you can probably think of some others. So if you've heard things like this, or maybe even some of these things, then again, these are criticisms. These are so-called you statements. Now, the you is a very important word here. And if you've learned things like active listening and maybe other methods of responding, you may have learned something well, you never use you. And this is why you tends to be avoided, because these are all you statements. They're pointing the finger at you. However, we're going to apply some verbal jujitsu to the word you. And in fact, you is just the most wonderful word. And when it comes to responding to criticism, we will only use the word you, but we will use it in a more gentle way than what these criticisms are. One of the most interesting one is that first one, you're not listening to me. Chances are many of you have heard this, and maybe some of you have said it. Now, here's what's interesting is that oftentimes one person will say, you're not listening to me. then what does the other person say? Well, usually you'll say, well, yes, I was listening to you. And then what's the next line in this dialogue? Well, what did I just say? And then you go to repeat back word for word exactly what the other person said. And for some reason, that never makes them happy. Have you ever wondered why? You know, I was listening to you. I heard every word you say, and I can repeat it back to you word for word, and you're still unhappy about it. Now think about why that might be so. And again, this is what happens. You know, when we hear criticism like that, it comes across like somebody's shouting in our ear with a bullhorn. Now, how do we usually react? Something like this. See, because it leads to, you know, look at this. They're facing away from each other. You know, here are two people that probably care about each other a great deal, and yet in that moment, they're looking like this. And what they want is to look like, you know, something like this. Now, isn't this a much better energy? And I will note that in the images I have for here, these are heterosexual couples, and what I'm presenting is absolutely not restricted to that. It is absolutely applicable, regardless of the note of the kind of relationship that it is, the gender of the two people. It is absolutely applicable 100%, regardless of the gender of the individual. So again, my images are of a male and a female, and it is absolutely not restricted to that whatsoever. Again, so we're back to, you know, how do we react to this? Well, there are two basic ways that we react. The first is fight. So, you know, I'm not listening to you. You never listen to me. Or, you know, I'm selfish. You know, look in the mirror. You're the one who's selfish. So basically, we're like this guy right here, just kind of punching back. Or we may bring out the big guns. So you know, the other, you know, you don't listen to me. I don't listen to you. You know, so our reaction can be twice as great as the initial one. That's the fight response. In other words, our first reaction may be to counterattack. Or flight. Our first reaction may be just to sort of flee, and that fleeing may be either physical, we just kind of got to get out of there, or it may be just sort of more mental, where we just kind of zone out, as in some of the other pictures. But either way, it's like this is so noxious to us that we just want to get the heck out of there as fast as we can. Now, where do these reactions come from? Now, some will say, well, this is part of our instinct, the fight or flight, our lizard brain and all that. And there's a certain element to which that's true. But a large part of what our reactions do go back to how we were treated when we were little. Now, no matter how loving and wonderful your parents were, the chances are that there was some time at which they had to, you know, discipline you in some way. And no matter how loving that may be, it still doesn't feel good to a little one. So, you know, if you're a little girl like this, and, you know, this big giant father is you know, pointing the finger and saying, okay, you did wrong, you know, look at the way she is. And look the way this little boy is. So, you know, even though the mother is not, you know, she's just, you know, calling him on something he's did, it still feels like that. And there are two actors in each of these. There's the child and there's the parent. And the thing is that with kids, they not only feel what they feel, but don't have the words or the emotional maturity to deal with it. But they also are incredible at modeling. In other words, what they see their parents do is something that they can imitate. and that can become important. Because the way we react to criticism is in one of two ways, is coming from what I call the child self, and that's where the flight comes in. Or we come from the parent self, and that's where the fight comes in. In other words, when we identify with the child in this image, then we're coming from the child or victim self. And if we identify with the parent, say, well, this doesn't feel good, but what they're doing, that must be right. So I'll be like that. So that's the fight. So if something bad happens, then I'll counterattack. Now, as children, those were adaptive mechanisms that we used to survive. But as an adult, when we are that way, either fight or flight, we're unconscious and reactive. In other words, we are coming from a reactive place that has its roots in these deep unconscious places. And the thing is that if you want to take a situation in which there is conflict, and even a situation in which you are hearing criticism, if you react, then that just means that things are going to go off the rail. So when we react from the child self, that's when we become a victim. And there's shame, we feel shame, we feel defensive. In other words, we're making ourselves wrong. And in a way, we kind of have this unconscious throwback to when we were little and being scolded. And if we identify with that, then we kind of shrink in, we make ourselves wrong, and we act defensive. It can come across, I'm so sorry. Oh yeah, I'm terrible. And the thing is that if that doesn't help, that doesn't help to make yourself wrong. Or if we react from we identify with the parent, we can react from the parent self. So that even if we're not attacking, we're judging, it's ego driven. We are criticizing ourselves, and we counterattack, and we make the other person wrong. There's something that's common to both of these, and that is making somebody wrong. When we're a victim, we make ourselves wrong. When we come from the parent self, we make the other person wrong. And so you're probably asking, well, what the heck can I do instead? If I can't react from the child self, if I can't react from the parent self, what the heck is there? Well, instead of reacting, and I use that word very carefully, we can respond. And that is because we as adults, we have higher mental functions. We don't have to be slaves to our conditioning. And when I call this the aware heart, and it's the only place where we are conscious and responsive instead of unconscious and reactive. And the key element is we do not make the other person wrong. So even though they're wagging their finger or criticizing and yelling at us, we don't make them wrong, and we don't make ourselves wrong. Wow, that's a pretty tall order. Even and especially, maybe you're at fault. Maybe they have a good case for criticism. You still don't make yourself wrong. Now, it doesn't mean you evade responsibility. On the other hand, maybe there isn't a good case. They don't have a good reason for criticizing it, yet they're upset and they're criticizing us. Well, we don't make them wrong either. That's a pretty tall order. But as long as we are in our aware heart, what that means is that nobody is wrong. Now, to understand this, we have what I call the anger iceberg. And the thing is that when we are hearing this anger coming at us, it's important to understand that anger is just the tip of the iceberg. The anger is really not a fundamental feeling. It's a derived one. It's one that sits on top of other feelings like fear or hurt, embarrassment, concern, disappointment. And at the bottom of all of it is a lack of trust of getting the needs met. And what's important is to understand that this is what's going on in the other person. If you see anger, if somebody's criticizing you and they're angry, then that anger is just the tip of the iceberg. There is something underneath. And so if we react to that anger, then we're not getting at what's really going on. What's really going on for that person is something underneath the waves. All criticism is an anger iceberg. Because if I'm criticizing you, then I'm projecting blame. I'm not acknowledging my true feelings. I'm allowing them to come out as anger. And again, that's something that really goes back to, to childhood in a way, because little kids do not have the emotional maturity to understand everything that they feel. And so if something doesn't feel right, then a lot of times they've learned that kind of throwing a tantrum or being angry or just kind of yelling is just one way that they can get their needs met. I remember my middle son once was so upset about having to go to bed at his regularly scheduled bedtime that I remember he stood in the hallway with his fists clenched and he said, "I hate you." Now, of course he didn't hate me, but that was, or I don't know, maybe he did. Only his psychiatrist knows for sure. But in fact, in that moment, he was just expressing in the only way he knew how. But he was a little one. As adults, though, we often don't get over that. So the message is typically one of unmet needs, painful feelings. You see, if the one criticizing you, if they were conscious, if they were truly conscious and something was going on that they wanted to have change, they would be able to express this in a non-blameful way. It is absolutely possible to express something that you want changed in a non-blameful way. And that's the topic of another workshop, but it's just to understand that is right there. So I love this picture of the aware heart. So what's happening here is this is on the left of the screen is somebody who's upset about something. You can see they're now here they're not absolutely furious, but they're not very happy, and they are sending a message about that unhappiness, and they're sending it in an unconscious way. Now here is the conscious listener. And what the conscious listener understands is that underneath the anger, underneath the criticism, is a hidden message. What's under that iceberg. And so understanding that hidden message is there, the listener responds from their aware heart, and they reflect back to the speaker in a way that connects with the speaker's aware heart. Now, this doesn't necessarily happen instantaneously, and when we do some demonstrations, I hope you can kind of see how that may happen. But again, the listener hears the criticism. They don't take it personally. They realize that the speaker is in some kind of pain or has some kind of hidden message. They decode that message, because one of the interesting things is that if you get out of reactivity and into your consciousness, you can see that that hidden message, especially in criticism, is often just blatant. That in a way they're kind of screaming what that hidden message is. They're screaming what their want is. And so if you respond from your aware heart without reacting, so you see how that person is kind of very pleasant, they respond in a way that only connects with with the heart of the speaker. And that helps the speaker move to their resolution. So the specific way that I teach is called tracking, and this is what I learned from studying for many years with someone who espoused this. She sadly passed away this past March, right before all this COVID stuff hit. So, but she taught it for many, many years and had hundreds of students who have learned this. It's called tracking. And it's sort of if you've learned active listening, it's kind of like that, but it has the same attitude, but it has a slightly different structure. So the idea, the attitude of tracking is about validation. In other words, instead of taking the criticism or instead of reacting or counterattacking, you validate what is going on for the other person. In other words, what is it you're validating? You're validating that there is a legitimate problem that the other person has. Right or wrong doesn't matter. It doesn't matter whether their being upset is based upon something which they have, that they're wrong about the facts. That has absolutely no bearing on this whatsoever. They can have their facts completely wrong, but their feelings about it are absolutely legitimate and valid. So facts and thoughts, they can be right or wrong. Feelings are just what we feel. So even if they're expressing it in a challenging manner, in a manner that just doesn't feel comfortable, the thing is they still have a legitimate problem. And so when you validate, it doesn't mean that you're agreeing. And this is something that sometimes people struggle with a little bit. Validating that the other person has a problem does not mean agreeing with what they believe about it. It means, however, that you're at least implicitly agreeing that they have a right to their point of view. In other words, if they're upset about something, then it's the upset that is the tip of the iceberg and it is covering up some underlying issue, some underlying feeling that they're having. And they have an absolute right to that. Again, they could be wrong about all the facts, and what they feel is worth validating. And you're probably thinking, what do you mean I should validate? That just doesn't make any sense whatsoever. This person is being a jerk. They're basing stuff on things that are absolutely wrong. And what do you mean I should validate? How's that supposed to work? I agree that it's really counterintuitive. It is really counterintuitive because when somebody's coming at you, again, if you just think about it, it's like, and if you think about that criticism that you maybe wrote down before, it's like, how dare they? Or this is terrible. I need to get out of here. So it's counterintuitive to say that you should validate them, huh? So if you're thinking that this doesn't make any sense, then it probably doesn't. So bear with me. See, there's just one thing, as counterintuitive as it is, it actually works. And so how do I do it? Well, here's where the demonstration comes in. Well, in just a minute. So when I present a little bit about tracking, about how to validate effectively. And I'm going to give you 2 magic words, and you can write those on your handout just to remember them. And those 2 magic words are so you. Remember I said that we're going to come back to this you? So if you begin your response with these 2 words, so you, and then see what comes after. First of all, beginning with so, and then saying you, means that it's not going to, the chances are it's not going to be a you statement. You do not want to make you statements. A tracking statement uses the word you, and at least in the beginning, if you begin with so you, then and then see what comes next based upon what the other person is saying. Now, we only use the pronoun you. You never mix I. You never say us or we, only you. Never I, me, my, never us or our. Why is that? Because you want to keep the focus on what the speaker wants. So now, why are they doing this? There is something that they want. And so it is almost impossible for a person to remain angry and upset if you're reflecting to them what it is that they want. So the tracking approach, you don't react, you respond. Don't come from the child, don't come from the parent, come from the aware heart. Validate, you keep the focus on the speaker with so you, and you respond to the feelings more than the words. And this is where it's important to also notice tone of voice, body language, facial expressions. Again, only the pronoun you, and most importantly, you never make anybody wrong. See, this tracking is a way to respond, to make a connection with that person, to get what they're really after, and to not make them wrong. So I'm going to give you some examples, and then hopefully some of you are going to be willing to do a little role play with what we have. So here are some examples. You say, you just won't listen. So how could we track that? Again, the most common response is, I was too listening. So what is the hidden message? You just won't listen? So you want to be understood. Or so there's something that you want understood and it hasn't happened yet. How about, you're so selfish? So you want your needs taken into account, or you feel your needs haven't been taken into account, or you want to have your needs. You feel you haven't been getting a fair shake. You're so unfair. So you want it to be more equitable. So you want things to be more equal. Again, there's not just one way of doing it, but do you see the idea here? You're such a slob. Okay, why would somebody says that? Well, so you want the place to be kept neat and not have to do all the work. So again, there are two hidden messages here that I can see. One is they don't like the mess, but the other is that they probably have been feeling that they have been doing all the cleaning up. Okay, so that's what they want. Now you're not agreeing to anything. And maybe you feel that the place is perfectly neat. And again, there seems to be some gender differences about what constitutes a neat place, but that's another topic. Okay, so these are some examples of how to track. And now I want to move to a demonstration.
Arnie, we have a question.
Okay. Yes.
Why won't persons stay angry?
Why won't they stay angry?
Yeah.
Oh, well, because yeah, I'm not sure why, but I do know that it is almost impossible to stay angry when you're being validated. Yeah, let me try to illustrate. So does somebody have an angry statement they'd like to throw at me? Anybody?
Okay, can I ask you?
Sure.
So Arnie, why didn't you clean up the dishes today?
So you want to understand why they weren't cleaned up?
Yeah, I want to know why you didn't clean up the dishes, because I don't want to clean them up.
So you were expecting them to be cleaned and you're confused as to why they weren't.
Yeah, that's right.
And I'd be happy to explain. You get without context. I mean, was it my turn and I didn't do it?
Yeah, I cleaned them up yesterday.
This
was your turn to do it.
So you want to be assured that when it's my turn that it gets taken care of.
Yeah, that's right.
And you know, I did forget this time, and I will take care of it all the times, you know, when it's my turn.
Okay, thanks, Arnie. That sounds good.
Okay, but here's the thing: were you able to keep your anger up?
No.
Yeah,
It's quite disarming.
so,
So,
and
Arnie,
you know, that wasn't. Yeah, and again, these are all. I mean, I'm responding spontaneously, and sometimes it's hard in context, you know, without more context. But the point is that when and here's what I get: it's like if you're sitting calmly, it's kind of hard to put yourself in that position, and it's hard to imagine that, okay, this angry person is going to stay angry no matter what I say. And I mean, I have to say that there may be people for whom it may not reach, but my experience has been that if you validate the person, if you validate where they're coming from, you can kind of peel back the hidden want. Like in this particular case, you know, the want was they, you know, hey, I want, you know, when it's our turn, when it's my turn, I want to be assured that it'll get done. That was the underlying want here. If I could just do one last few things on the slide, just as a summary. Respond instead of react from the aware heart. These two magic words, so you, are just absolutely wonderful. Validate even or especially if you disagree, and never make anybody wrong. Okay, we did questions. There is an evaluation form. There's an online link, I believe.
I will send it out
Okay.
with a thank you email.
And finally, just one, where are you here? Where's Zoom? Where are you, Zoom? I just have one shameless plug, which is that I do give seminars. I also consult with individuals and couples on effective communication and relationship building. The email for that is ahbuss@consciousawareheart.com. That's just kind of what I do there. So anything that you'd be interested, you can email me there. And that does conclude my presentation.
One more question came out from
okay.
Diana. Do you recommend this technique if someone sends criticism via email?
No. And here's why. That's a great question. And this is something that I've literally devoted a long, long time to trying to solve. Here's the problem. The problem is that the effectiveness of these responses comes not just in the words, but in the way in which they're spoken. With email or text messages or anything else, all you see is the spoken word. And I literally tried for years to find an effective way to do this using nothing but text. And so far, I have not found a way. The problem, I believe, is that if you're in conflict with somebody and you can respond in the most wonderful words possible, but the other person is going to hear it in a different tone than you said it. They're going to hear it in an angry tone, or they're going to hear it in a reactive tone. And I have not been able to find a way to do that. So I strongly recommend that there at least be voice. So at the very minimum on the phone, but in person is the best way to do it. Over email and text, I have not found an effective way to do this. So what I would recommend is that if there's something like that to come up, to say something like, I'd like to talk about this. Can we have a phone call, or can we meet for coffee and or something like that. I wish I had a better answer. Again, I literally tried for years to find a way to to make this effective. I mean, everything else being equal, it's better to kind of use this kind of words in responding. And I just have not found it to work the way that things do when it's, you know, it's either in person or voice to voice, or even with Zoom, it's sort of effective. The most effective is person to person, because you get so much of it is the fact that in your responses, with your voice, with your face, with your gestures, you are still accepting and validating that person with not only your words, but with your whole body. Okay.
Thank you, Arnie.
Anything more?
Nothing much, I don't think so.
Okay, well, in that case, I want to thank thank you, Abhijit, for being a wonderful host on this. So thank you for the District 101 tech team that have just been absolutely fantastic and kind of helping me with this Zoom thing. By the time this COVID is over, I'm going to finally be able to work Zoom, and then I won't have to anymore. Thank you for all of that, and thank you for inviting me to do this. And thank you for everyone who has, who has offered, made a question or raised a concern or offered to do a role play. So I always learn something when I do this, and I've certainly learned a lot this evening. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Arnie. I also learned a lot. I'm going to try to become a conscious sapien.
Yeah.
Our next seminar is on July 29th. It is by Carrie Lynn Morgan. The title of the workshop is Active Trust. Looking forward to seeing you next week again. Thank you so much.